They had prepared themselves to die. German soldiers stood shivering in the snow, waiting for vengeance from their conquerors. In Europe, they had seen prisoners beaten, starved, left to freeze in the bitter cold. But what happened next left them speechless. An American soldier approached not with a club or rope but with a thick wool overcoat and real leather jacket. "Put this on. It's cold." In that moment, many Germans understood. They had been lied to throughout the entire war. The winter of 1944 arrived early in the Ardennes forest. By mid-December, temperatures had plummeted to 15 degrees below freezing. Ice crystallized on bare branches. Snow fell in thick sheets that erased the boundary between earth and sky. Private Wilhelm Hartmann crouched in a foxhole that offered no protection from the wind. His uniform, once the pride of the Wehrmacht, hung threadbare on his gaunt frame. The wool had worn thin after 3 years of continuous fighting. His boots, resoled twice with cardboard, leaked freezing water into his socks. He was 22 years old. He looked 40. Around him, what remained of his company huddled in similar positions. Faces gray with exhaustion, eyes hollow from hunger. They had not received proper rations in 6 days. The supply lines had collapsed. The grand offensive their commanders promised had stalled in the Belgian countryside, broken against American resistance that refused to yield. Wilhelm pulled his collar tighter, though it did nothing against the cold that penetrated his bones. He thought of his mother's kitchen in Hamburg, the way steam rose from potato soup on winter evenings. That memory felt like it belonged to someone else's life. "They're coming," whispered Karl Fischer, the sergeant who had somehow kept them alive through France, through the Rhineland, through this frozen hell. His voice carried no emotion anymore, just facts. Just the next terrible thing. Wilhelm heard them before he saw them. Boots crunching through snow. American voices calling to each other in that strange, confident cadence. The sound of a nation that had never been invaded, never starved, never watched its cities burn. He thought about what the propaganda officers had told them. Americans were savages, they said. Mongrels with no culture, no honor. They tortured prisoners. They shot surrendering soldiers. They showed no mercy because they understood no mercy. Wilhelm had believed it once, before he saw the reality of war, before he understood that those who speak loudest about honor are often those who possess none. The Americans appeared through the trees like ghosts materializing from snow. So many of them. Fresh uniforms, clean weapons. They moved with the certainty of men who knew victory was inevitable. Karl looked at Wilhelm. Neither spoke. They both knew what came next. "Hands up," Karl said quietly. No sudden moves. Wilhelm stood slowly, raising his frozen hands above his head. His rifle fell into the snow. Around the foxhole, other soldiers did the same. A few tried to run. Gunfire cracked through the forest. The runners fell. The rest stood still, hands raised, waiting. An American lieutenant approached, young and clean-shaven, breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. He surveyed the captured Germans with an expression Wilhelm could not read. Not hatred, not triumph, something else entirely. "Search them," the lieutenant ordered. "Get them out of the cold." Wilhelm braced himself. This was when it would begin. The beatings, the revenge for all the American boys buried in the snow. He had seen what German soldiers did to prisoners when no officers were watching. Why would the Americans be any different? But the hands that searched him were efficient, not cruel. They took his empty ammunition pouches, his identification papers, nothing more. No one struck him. No one spat at him. "Move," an American sergeant said, gesturing toward a waiting truck. Wilhelm stumbled forward, his frozen legs barely supporting his weight. Karl caught his arm, steadied him. They walked together through the snow, surrounded by American soldiers who kept their rifles ready but their fingers off the triggers. The truck bed was metal, painfully cold through Wilhelm's thin trousers. 20 Germans crowded together, sharing what little warmth their bodies still produced. The truck engine rumbled to life. They drove west, away from the front, away from everything Wilhelm had known. He thought about home, wondered if he would ever see Hamburg again, wondered what they did to German prisoners in America. The propaganda said terrible things, but the propaganda had said terrible things about the Americans too. And so far, nothing had happened. Carl leaned close. "Remember Kurt," he whispered. Wilhelm nodded. Kurt Bauer had been captured by the Russians on the Eastern Front. They had heard stories about the Soviet camps. Starvation, forced labor. Men worked until they died, then replaced with more prisoners. Of the 300,000 Germans captured at Stalingrad, fewer than 6,000 ever came home. "At least it's the Americans," Carl added. "At least." Such a small word to hang your life upon. The truck stopped at a checkpoint. American voices exchanged passwords. They drove on. Through the canvas cover, Wilhelm glimpsed lights. Generator-powered floodlights illuminating a vast camp of tents and temporary buildings. This was where captured soldiers disappeared. This was where questions ended. They unloaded in a processing area. Snow had been cleared from the ground, revealing frozen mud beneath. Wilhelm's legs trembled as he stood. He had not eaten real food in so long that his body barely remembered how. More Americans appeared. One carried a clipboard, another held a camera. They were documenting everything. Names, units, ranks. Building evidence for trials, Wilhelm thought. Cataloging those who would be punished. "Form a line," someone shouted in accented German. They obeyed. Defeated soldiers learning the first rule of captivity. Do what you are told. Survive another day. Wilhelm stood between Carl and a young private named Martin Schneider, who still had tears frozen on his cheeks. The boy could not have been more than 18. An American soldier walked down the line, studying faces. He stopped at Martin. "How old are you, kid?" Martin did not understand English. He stared with terrified eyes. The American switched to broken German. "Age? How many years?" 18, Martin whispered. The American shook his head. "Jesus. Just babies." He moved on. Wilhelm did not know what to make of this. The casualness, the lack of rage. Where was the vengeance? Where was the hatred they had been promised? The processing took hours, questions asked and answered through interpreters. Wilhelm told them his name, his unit, his rank, nothing more. He gave them what the Geneva Convention required, though he wondered if the rules still applied. If rules ever applied when nations wanted blood. As night fell, the cold intensified. Wilhelm's entire body shook with uncontrollable tremors. His fingers had gone numb hours ago. He could no longer feel his toes. Hypothermia, he thought distantly. This is how it ends. Not from bullets or bombs, but from simple cold. Then, something changed. The American sergeant who had first searched Wilhelm reappeared. His name tag read Peterson. He carried something over his arm. Wilhelm tensed. This was it. The moment when mercy ended. Peterson stopped in front of him, held out what he carried. "Here," he said. Wilhelm stared. It was a coat, a heavy wool overcoat with U.S. Army insignia on the shoulders. The kind of quality garment Wilhelm had not seen since before the war. "Take it," Peterson said. "You'll freeze without it." Wilhelm did not move, could not process what was happening. This had to be a trick, a test. Take the coat and be beaten for accepting American charity, or refuse and be beaten for ingratitude. There was no correct answer. Peterson sighed. He stepped forward and draped the coat over Wilhelm's shoulders. The weight surprised him. Real wool, thick and heavy. Still warm from wherever it had been stored. Wilhelm's body responded before his mind could, pulling the coat closed, soaking in the first genuine warmth he had felt in weeks. "Better?" Peterson asked. Wilhelm nodded, unable to speak. Peterson moved down the line, distributing more coats. Some leather flight jackets, some wool overcoats. All American military issue, all better quality than anything the Wehrmacht had issued in the last 2 years of the war. Carl received a leather bomber jacket lined with sheepskin. He put it on slowly, as if expecting it to vanish. His expression transformed from suspicion to confusion, to something close to wonder. Martin got a wool coat 2 sizes too large. He disappeared into it, wrapping his thin arms around himself. The shaking that had racked his body began to ease. Wilhelm looked down at the coat he wore. It had captain's bars on the collar. Some American officer had given up his personal coat so a German prisoner would not freeze. Nothing in his training had prepared him for this. The propaganda officers had filled their heads with stories of American brutality, lectures about the mongrel nation, with no culture, no honor, no humanity. Soldiers who fought only for money, who understood nothing of sacrifice or duty. But if that were true, why was Wilhelm warm for the first time in months? Other Americans appeared with more supplies. Wool blankets, thick socks, gloves. They moved efficiently through the prisoners, distributing winter gear with the same casual competence they brought to everything. An American medic stopped at a German soldier whose feet had turned black with frostbite. He knelt in the snow, examining the damage. "This is bad," the medic said to another American. "Get him to the medical tent. He might lose those toes, but maybe we can save the feet." They loaded the frostbitten soldier onto a stretcher, carried him away. Wilhelm watched, trying to reconcile what he saw with what he had been taught. "Why are they doing this?" Martin whispered in German, still clutching his oversized coat. "I don't know," Wilhelm answered honestly. Karl turned to look at them both. His face, usually so controlled, showed cracks in its armor. "Because they can afford to," he said quietly. "Their country has not been bombed. Their factories still run. They have so much, they can give it away to enemies." But Wilhelm thought it was more than that. Abundance alone did not create mercy. He had seen wealthy men who possessed nothing but cruelty. This was something else, something he lacked words to describe. An American lieutenant approached their group, younger than Wilhelm, probably 20 or 21, with the kind of clean-cut appearance that came from never missing a meal, never sleeping in a frozen foxhole, never watching friends die for worthless ground. The lieutenant spoke in careful German. "You will be taken to barracks. There is food, hot water for washing, medical care if you need it. You are prisoners of war, protected by international law. We will treat you according to that law. Do you understand?" Wilhelm and the others nodded. "Good. Form up. Follow the trucks." They marched through the camp, hundreds of captured German soldiers wrapped in American winter gear. Wilhelm noticed other prisoners already in the compound. Some had been there for days, maybe weeks. They wore the same American coats, moved with less fear, even spoke casually with guards. The barracks were simple wooden structures, but they had heating stoves that glowed red with burning coal. Wilhelm stepped inside and felt warmth wash over him like a blessing. Bunk beds lined the walls, each with actual mattresses, not just wooden slats. Blankets folded at the foot of each bed. "Find a bunk," a guard said. "Dinner in 30 minutes. Dinner. A meal with a schedule, not scrounged rations or stolen bread. An actual planned meal." Wilhelm chose a lower bunk, sat on the mattress. It gave beneath his weight, soft and yielding. He could not remember the last time he had slept on something other than frozen ground or a bare wooden floor. Karl took the bunk above him. Martin climbed into one across the aisle. For a long moment, no one spoke. They simply sat in the warmth, wearing coats given by their enemies, trying to understand what had happened. "This is wrong," Martin finally said. His voice shook. "Everything they told us was wrong." An older German prisoner, already settled in a nearby bunk, laughed bitterly. "You're just figuring that out now? Where have you been? Fighting for the fatherland." Martin shot back with a flash of the ideology that had been beaten into his young head. The older prisoner's expression hardened. "I fought in Poland, in France, in Russia. You know what I learned? The fatherland does not exist. There are only men who give orders, and men who die following them. The Americans understand this. They fight because they must, but they do not lose their humanity in the process." "You sound like a traitor," Martin said, but without conviction. "I sound like someone who wants to survive, who wants to go home. The war is over, boy. We lost. The question now is whether we live long enough to see Germany again." Wilhelm lay back on his bunk, still wearing the American captain's overcoat. The wool smelled faintly of tobacco and some kind of soap. Human smells. The smell of a life where men had time to wash their clothes, to smoke cigarettes in peace, to exist as something other than instruments of violence. He thought about the years of war, the propaganda that had filled the radio waves, the newspapers, the speeches. Americans were weak, they said, soft and decadent, spoiled by wealth, incapable of real sacrifice. But Wilhelm had fought Americans, had seen them advance through artillery fire, carry wounded comrades from burning vehicles, hold positions against overwhelming force. There was nothing soft about them, and now this strange mercy that his training had insisted could not exist. A bell rang somewhere outside. The guard reappeared. Dinner. Line up outside. They filed out into the cold, but Wilhelm barely noticed it beneath the thick wool coat. They marched to a mess hall that smelled of cooking meat and coffee. Real coffee, not the chicory substitute that had sustained the Wehrmacht for the past year. Inside, American soldiers dished food from large pots. Wilhelm received a metal tray, moved through the line, a ladle full of stew thick with beef and vegetables, 2 slices of white bread, a cup of coffee with real cream and sugar. He found a seat at a long table, stared at the food. His stomach cramped with sudden hunger so intense it hurt. Karl sat beside him. "Eat slowly," he warned. "Your body is not used to this much food. You will make yourself sick." Wilhelm nodded, took a small bite of stew. The flavors exploded in his mouth, salt and meat and pepper and things he could not identify. His eyes watered. He forced himself to eat slowly, though every instinct screamed to devour it all at once. Around him, other prisoners ate with the same desperate control. Some failed, eating too quickly, vomiting into waste buckets minutes later. The American soldiers did not mock them, just brought water, cleaned up the mess, encouraged them to try again more slowly. Martin managed 3 bites before his shrunken stomach rebelled. He sat with his head in his hands, tears of frustration streaming down his face. An American sergeant brought him crackers and weak tea. "Small bites," he said in broken German. "Tomorrow, more food. Your body needs time." The kindness broke something in Martin. He sobbed quietly, shoulders shaking. The American patted his back awkwardly, then moved on to help another prisoner. Wilhelm finished his meal, forcing himself to stop before his stomach felt full. The coffee was the best thing he had ever tasted. He drank it slowly, savoring every sip. Back in the barracks, clean blankets waited. Wilhelm removed his boots, his ruined, cardboard-soled boots that had carried him through 3 years of hell. Set them beside the bunk, lay down fully clothed except for the American overcoat, which he folded carefully and placed at the foot of the bed. The mattress cradled his broken body. The blankets held warmth. For the first time since he could remember, Wilhelm felt safe. He thought about home, about his mother, about the life he had left behind when he marched away in 1941, filled with pride and certainty, and the absolute knowledge that he fought for something righteous. All lies, beautiful, terrible lies that had consumed millions of lives. But tonight, in an American prisoner camp, wrapped in enemy blankets and fed with enemy food, Wilhelm was warm and safe. He fell asleep, wondering what that meant. Morning came with the sound of a bugle playing reveille. Wilhelm woke disoriented, his body protesting every movement. He had slept deeply for the first time in months, and his muscles had stiffened in the warmth. Pale winter light filtered through the barracks windows. Other prisoners stirred, coughing and groaning as they returned to consciousness. The older German prisoner who had spoken last night was already up, standing by the stove, warming his hands. "Breakfast in 30 minutes, he announced to the room. "They feed us 3 times a day here. Get used to it." Wilhelm sat up slowly. His body ached, but it was the ache of healing, not continued deterioration. He pulled on the American overcoat, grateful for its weight and warmth. Karl climbed down from the upper bunk, moving like an old man despite being only 25. "I had forgotten what real sleep felt like," he said quietly. They joined the morning routine. Washing stations had been set up outside with actual hot water. Wilhelm stripped to the waist despite the cold, scrubbing away weeks of accumulated grime. The water turned gray, then brown. An American soldier handed him a bar of soap. Keep it, the soldier said. We've got plenty. Wilhelm clutched the soap like treasure. In the Wehrmacht, soap had become scarcer than ammunition. Breakfast was oatmeal with brown sugar and milk. More bread. Coffee. Wilhelm's stomach accepted the food better this morning, having adjusted slightly to the shock of abundance. After breakfast, a different American officer appeared. A captain with a kind face and gray at his temples. He addressed them in fluent German. My name is Captain Richard Morrison. I grew up in Milwaukee, where half the city spoke German. My grandparents came from Bavaria. He paused, looking over the assembled prisoners. I tell you this so you understand I know your language, but I am American. My loyalty is to my country. However, my country has signed the Geneva Convention, and I will enforce its terms absolutely. You are prisoners, but you are also human beings entitled to basic dignity and care. Morrison walked among them as he spoke. You will work. Light labor maintaining the camp, helping in kitchens and workshops. You will be paid a small wage in camp script that you can use at the canteen. You will receive mail from home when possible, and you may send letters, subject to censorship. You will be treated fairly. If any guard mistreats you, you will report it to me personally. Do you understand? Murmurs of acknowledgement rippled through the prisoners. Good. Now, I understand many of you are still processing what has happened. You expected different treatment. You were told things about Americans that perhaps do not match your current experience. Morrison's expression grew stern. I cannot speak to what your government told you. I can only show you the truth. Judge us by our actions, not by propaganda. He left, and the prisoners dispersed to their assigned work details. Wilhelm found himself assigned to the camp carpentry shop. He had worked in his father's furniture business before the war, so he knew his way around tools. The American sergeant in charge, a man named Douglas who spoke no German, demonstrated what needed doing through gestures and patience. They were building additional barracks for expected prisoners. Wilhelm worked slowly at first, his hands clumsy from cold and malnutrition, but muscle memory returned. The familiar smell of sawdust, the sound of hammers and saws, normal human labor, not the desperate scramble of combat. Around midday, Douglas pulled out a thermos and offered Wilhelm coffee. Real coffee, hot and strong. Wilhelm accepted it hesitantly. Douglas poured himself a cup from the same thermos, sat on a stack of lumber, and lit a cigarette. He offered one to Wilhelm. They sat in silence. Two men who had been enemies days ago, now sharing coffee and tobacco in weak winter sunlight. Douglas pulled out a photo from his wallet. His wife and two children, a boy and girl, standing in front of a white house with a neat lawn. He pointed to the children, held up fingers. 6, 8. Wilhelm understood. The boy was 6, the girl 8. Douglas gestured to Wilhelm. You? Family? Wilhelm shook his head. Mother, sister. Hamburg, Douglas nodded sadly. He had probably seen bombing reports. Hamburg had been devastated by Allied raids, but he said nothing, just squeezed Wilhelm's shoulder briefly before returning to work. That small gesture of shared humanity stayed with Wilhelm all day. Not all the prisoners adjusted quickly. That evening, Wilhelm witnessed a confrontation in the barracks. A group of younger Germans, recent conscripts who had absorbed years of intense propaganda, stood clustered around their bunks. They had removed the American coats, folded them into precise squares, and placed them at the foot of their beds. They wore only their thin Wehrmacht uniforms despite the cold. We are German soldiers. Their leader, a corporal named Dieter Vogel, announced loudly. We do not accept charity from the enemy. This is a trick. They want us to become soft, to forget our duty. Karl stood up from his bunk. Our duty is to survive, you fool. The war is over. We lost. Freezing to death proves nothing. The war is not over until the Führer says it is over. Dieter shot back. The Führer is probably dead in a bunker somewhere, the older prisoner interjected. Even if he lives, he has already abandoned us. We are not soldiers anymore. We are prisoners trying to stay alive. Dieter's face flushed with anger. Cowards. All of you. You dishonor the fatherland. Wilhelm had stayed quiet until now, but something snapped. He stood, still wearing the American captain's overcoat. I will tell you about honor, Wilhelm said, his voice cold. I watched honor freeze to death in Russia. I watched honor starve in the Ardennes. I watched honor bleed out in the snow, while officers who spoke of glory sat in warm headquarters, drinking cognac. Honor is a word men use to make boys die for their ambitions. Dieter started to respond, but Wilhelm cut him off. I am alive today because Americans gave me a coat. Because they fed me. Because they treated me like a human being instead of a propaganda target. If that makes me a coward, then I am a coward. But I will be a living coward, and you will be a frozen corpse with your precious honor intact. Silence filled the barracks. Dieter glared at Wilhelm, but some of the conviction had drained from his face. The cold was already seeping through his thin uniform. His hands trembled. An American guard appeared at the door. Everything all right here? Yes, Karl answered in English. Just talking. The guard looked skeptical but nodded and moved on. That night, Wilhelm noticed, Dieter quietly retrieved his American coat and put it on. The next day brought another shock. Medical examinations. A team of American doctors set up in a converted warehouse, examining prisoners systematically. Wilhelm stripped for the exam, self-conscious about his emaciated frame. The doctor was older, maybe 50, with gentle hands and sad eyes. He checked Wilhelm's heart, lungs, teeth, made notes on a clipboard, spoke to a nurse in English too rapid for Wilhelm to follow. You have signs of severe malnutrition, the doctor said in accented German. Also likely vitamin deficiencies, mild frostbite in your toes, and what appears to be early-stage trench foot. We will treat all of it. You will receive supplemental vitamins with your meals. A podiatrist will see you about your feet. You should make a full recovery. Wilhelm stared. You will treat me? Why? The doctor looked surprised by the question. Because you are sick. That is what doctors do. But I am the enemy. No, the doctor corrected gently. You were a soldier. Now you are a patient. The war continues, but here, in this room, there is no enemy. Only people who need care. Wilhelm received a pair of proper boots. Military issue. Better than anything he had worn in the Wehrmacht. The doctor personally fitted them, ensuring they would not aggravate his damaged feet. Wear thick socks, the doctor advised. Keep them dry. No more frostbite. Wilhelm walked back to the barracks in his new boots, his mind reeling. He thought about German military hospitals, where wounded soldiers were sometimes given amphetamines to get them back to the front faster, where care was always secondary to military necessity. This was different. This was medicine for its own sake. That afternoon, packages arrived. The camp canteen had received a shipment of goods, and prisoners with accumulated work scrip could purchase items. Wilhelm had earned enough for small luxuries. He bought chocolate, real Swiss chocolate, and a pack of American cigarettes. That evening, he shared the chocolate with Karl and Martin. They broke it into small pieces, letting it melt slowly on their tongues. Martin closed his eyes, a look of such pure pleasure on his young face that Wilhelm had to look away. My mother used to make hot chocolate, Martin said softly, every Christmas Eve, with cream and cinnamon. His voice broke. I wonder if she is still alive, if Hamburg is still there. No one answered. There were no good answers, but they sat together in their American coats, eating American chocolate, warmed by American coal, and for a brief moment, the present mattered more than the terrible past or uncertain future. Wilhelm dreamed of Russia. He woke, gasping, tangled in sweat-soaked blankets. In the dream, he had been back at Leningrad, watching prisoners of war stumble through snow toward a collection point, Soviet prisoners captured during the Wehrmacht's advance. Starving men in rags, faces hollow, eyes dead. The German guards had laughed, made jokes about Russian resilience, threw scraps to watch men fight over them like animals. Wilhelm had been there, had watched, had done nothing. He sat up in his bunk, breathing hard. Beside him, Karl stirred. The dreams? Karl asked quietly. Yes. Me too. They sat in darkness. Around them, other men slept or pretended to sleep. Some cried out in their dreams. Some wept silently. Some lay awake, staring at shadows. Do you remember the camp near Smolensk? Wilhelm whispered. Karl was quiet for a long moment. Yes, the Soviet prisoners. How they... I remember. Another silence, heavy with things they could not say. We did terrible things, Wilhelm finally said. We were told it was necessary, that they were subhuman, that the rules did not apply to them. Many of us believed it, Karl acknowledged. Or we told ourselves we believed it because belief was easier than resistance. And now we are prisoners, and the Americans give us coats. Karl turned to look at Wilhelm through the darkness. Do you see the lesson? That we were the monsters all along? That humanity is a choice, one we failed to make, one the Americans make every day, even toward those who chose differently. Wilhelm lay back down, but sleep would not return. He thought about the Russian prisoners, wondered how many had survived, guessed the number was small. He thought about the things he had witnessed, the things he had participated in through his silence, the weight of complicity. In the morning, after breakfast, Wilhelm found himself assigned to help in the camp hospital. The American medics needed someone to translate for German-speaking doctors who had also been captured and were now providing care to their fellow prisoners. Wilhelm spent the day watching American and German medical staff work side by side. A German surgeon, captured at Aachen, performed an emergency appendectomy using American equipment, assisted by an American nurse who handed him instruments with practiced efficiency. When the surgery finished successfully, the German doctor looked at the American nurse. "Thank you, Clara," he said in careful English. "You're welcome, Dr. Muller," she replied. No mention of nationality, no reference to enemies, just two medical professionals doing their work. Wilhelm thought about the hospital trains he had seen in Russia. Cars full of wounded Germans past cars full of dead Soviet prisoners. The contrast had seemed normal then, justified. Now it made him sick. An American chaplain appeared in the afternoon, making rounds. He was older, with white hair and a soft voice. He stopped to talk with a German prisoner who had lost his leg to infection. "I am Protestant," the German said. "You are a Catholic priest, yes?" "I am," the chaplain confirmed. "Does that matter to you?" The German considered. "No, I suppose it does not. Then may I pray with you?" The German nodded. The chaplain sat beside his bed, took his hand, and prayed in English. The German could not understand the words, but he bowed his head and wept quietly. When the prayer ended, the chaplain asked, "Do you have family in Germany? A wife?" "2 children. In Bremen. I will write to the Red Cross. They will try to locate her. Tell her you are alive. You would do that? For me? Of course. Every family deserves to know their loved one's lives." The German wept harder. The chaplain stayed with him until the tears stopped. Wilhelm watched all of this, absorbed it, tried to reconcile it with the world he thought he understood. That evening, a new group of prisoners arrived. Fresh captures from the ongoing fighting. They stumbled from the trucks, exhausted and terrified. Wilhelm saw himself from 2 weeks ago in their faces. American soldiers distributed coats, blankets, food. The same routine, the same efficiency, the same inexplicable mercy. One of the new prisoners, a lieutenant, refused his coat, stood shivering in proud defiance. "I am an officer of the Wehrmacht. I do not accept enemy charity." The American sergeant shrugged. "Suit yourself, but when you're ready, it'll be here." He set the coat on a nearby bench and walked away. No argument, no force, just an offer, left open. Wilhelm approached the lieutenant. "Take the coat." "I will not. You will die if you do not." "Then I die with honor." Wilhelm grabbed the man's arm. "I thought that too. But there is no honor in freezing. There is only cold. And the cold does not care about your pride. You sound like a defeatist. I sound like someone who wants to live." Wilhelm picked up the coat, thrust it toward the lieutenant. "We have already lost everything else. Do not lose your life over a word." The lieutenant wavered. shivering violently now. Wilhelm saw the moment the ideology cracked, the survival instinct finally breaking through. "Just this once," the lieutenant muttered, taking the coat. "Yes," Wilhelm agreed. "Just this once." They both knew it was a lie. A small lie that allowed the lieutenant to preserve some fragment of his shattered worldview. Tomorrow he would wear the coat again. And the day after, and eventually, he would stop making excuses. Wilhelm had seen it happen to himself. Private Thomas Brennan stood guard duty on a cold February night, watching rows of barracks where German prisoners slept warm. He thought about his brother Danny, killed at Normandy. Thought about his cousin Mike, missing since the Battle of the Bulge. He should hate these Germans. He had every reason to hate them, but when he looked at the barracks, he just felt tired. Thomas was from Boston, son of Irish immigrants, raised Catholic, taught that every person carried God's image, even enemies. His mother had written him letters pleading for him to remember his humanity. "Don't let the war make you cruel," she wrote. "Come home, still yourself." He tried. God, he tried. Earlier that day, he had helped distribute winter coats to new prisoners. One of them, a kid who could not have been more than 17, had broken down crying when given a warm jacket, just sobbed like a child. Thomas had stood there awkwardly, not knowing what to do. Finally, he patted the kid's shoulder. "It's okay," he said, though the kid probably did not understand English. "You're okay now." The kid had looked at him with such gratitude, such confusion, such profound relief that Thomas had to turn away. He thought about what his unit had seen. The camps, the evidence of atrocities, the systematic horror of what Germany had done. But this kid, this 17-year-old conscript, he probably knew nothing about it, was probably just a farm boy who got drafted, handed a rifle, told to fight for the fatherland. How much guilt did he carry? How much did any of them carry? Thomas did not know, could not know. So he did what his mother asked. He remained human, gave coats to freezing prisoners, shared coffee with enemies, tried to see people instead of monsters. Some of the other guards struggled more. Corporal James Peterson, whose entire tank crew had been killed at Bastogne, refused to speak to the prisoners beyond necessary orders. His hatred was a cold, controlled thing, but it was there. "I don't understand you, Brennan," Peterson said one night. "These bastards killed our friends. Why should we give them anything?" "Because we're better than them," Thomas replied. "Because if we become what they are, they've won something even if we win the war." That's easy to say when it wasn't your crew burning alive. Thomas had no answer to that. Peterson's anger was earned, justified, maybe necessary, but Thomas could not share it. He had seen too much death to have room for more hate. He was full up. All he had left was a tired determination to get through this, to go home, to somehow rebuild a normal life from the wreckage. The prisoners helped in their own small ways. They were not allowed to bear arms, but they could work. Some were skilled craftsmen. A German carpenter named Wilhelm had proven particularly skilled, building barracks that would last years. Thomas had worked alongside him several times. Wilhelm did not speak much English. Thomas did not speak German, but they communicated through the universal language of carpentry. Wilhelm would hold a board. Thomas would measure. They would nod. The work would continue. Once, taking a break, Thomas had shown Wilhelm a photo of his family. Mother, father, 3 sisters, baby brother Danny. Wilhelm had looked at the photo for a long moment, then pulled out his own crumpled picture. A woman and young girl. Mother and sister, Thomas guessed. They sat in silence. 2 men looking at photos of people they might never see again. "Home," Wilhelm said carefully in English, his only word in Thomas's language. "Yeah," Thomas agreed. "Home." The American commanders took the Geneva Convention seriously. Captain Morrison conducted regular inspections, interviewed prisoners privately to check for mistreatment, investigated every complaint. When one guard was found stealing from prisoners, Morrison had him court-martialed. The man was sentenced to military prison and a dishonorable discharge. Morrison addressed the guards afterward. "We are Americans," he said. "We hold ourselves to higher standards. These prisoners are now under our protection. That is not a suggestion. That is an order backed by international law and basic human decency. Any man who cannot accept this can request transfer. I will grant it without prejudice. But while you serve in this camp, you will treat prisoners fairly or face consequences." Most guards accepted this, some grudgingly, some with relief. A few requested transfers. Thomas stayed. This felt important somehow. This small act of maintaining humanity in the midst of horror. It would not bring Danny back, would not undo Normandy or the Bulge or any of the terrible battles, but it was something, a small resistance against the chaos. One evening, Thomas found Wilhelm sitting alone outside the barracks, staring at the sunset. The German wore his American overcoat, a cigarette dangling from his lips. Thomas sat down beside him without asking. They watched the sun disappear behind distant trees, painting the snow gold and orange and red. "Beautiful," Wilhelm said. "Yeah," Thomas agreed. They sat until darkness fell and the stars emerged. Then Wilhelm stood, nodded to Thomas, and went inside to sleep. Thomas remained on the bench, thinking about the strangeness of war, how it made enemies of people who might have been friends in another life, how a few miles of dirt became worth thousands of lives, how hatred was supposed to be simple but never really was. His mother's latest letter had arrived that morning. She asked about his health, his spirits, whether he was staying warm. She told him about Boston, about church, about his sisters growing up too fast. At the end, she wrote, "Remember, Thomas, the war will end. But the man you become during it will stay with you forever. Choose wisely who you want to be." Thomas pulled out his small notebook, wrote a reply by the light of a camp floodlight. "Dear Mom, I'm trying to be someone you can be proud of. It's harder than I thought, but I'm trying." He sealed the letter, dropped it in the outgoing mailbox, and returned to his guard post. Inside the barracks, Wilhelm lay awake, thinking about the American soldier who had sat beside him in silence, thinking about all the Americans who had shown him unexpected kindness, thinking about what kind of nation produced such men. He fell asleep wearing the captain's overcoat, warm and safe, while outside the war continued. March brought the first hints of spring. Snow melted into mud. Ice retreated from tree branches. The sun appeared more often, weak but present. Wilhelm had been a prisoner for 3 months. 3 months that felt like 3 years and 3 days simultaneously. Time moved differently in captivity, each day indistinguishable from the last, yet each day subtly changing him in ways he was only beginning to understand. He worked in the carpentry shop now almost full-time. Douglas, the American sergeant, had requested him specifically. They had developed an efficient working relationship built on mutual respect and shared understanding of craft. One afternoon, Douglas brought his personal toolbox to the shop. Old tools, carefully maintained, worn smooth from decades of use. He showed Wilhelm a hand plane that had belonged to his grandfather. "Pennsylvania Dutch," Douglas explained. The English words, meaningless to Wilhelm. But the reverence in Douglas's voice as he handled the tool transcended language. Wilhelm examined the plane. Beautiful work. German craftsmanship, he realized with a start. This American soldier carried German tools, inherited from German ancestors who had emigrated generations ago. "German," Wilhelm said, pointing to the plane, then to himself. "German." Douglas understood. He nodded, smiled. "American now," he said, pointing to himself. Then he gestured to both of them, to the tools, to the work they shared. But same. Carpenter. Same. Wilhelm felt something shift in his understanding. These Americans were not alien creatures. Many of them were German, Irish, Italian, Polish. A nation built from pieces of Europe, carrying forward the skills and traditions of places they had left behind. And now those transplanted Europeans were defeating the countries their grandparents had come from. The irony was profound and sad. Carl had found work in the camp kitchen, helping prepare meals. He had worked as a baker before the war, and the American cooks appreciated his skill. One of them, a man named Anthony whose family came from Sicily, Taught Carl to make pizza. Italian food, Anthony explained through gestures and broken German. From Naples. My grandmother's recipe, Carl learned. Kneaded dough, spread sauce, added cheese, watched it bake in the large ovens. The smell was intoxicating. Anthony cut a slice, offered it to Carl. Carl bit into it carefully. Flavors exploded in his mouth. Tomato, cheese, herbs, the slight char of the crust. He closed his eyes. Good? Anthony asked. Good, Carl confirmed, one of his few English words. They stood in the kitchen, enemy soldiers making pizza together, and the war seemed very far away. Martin had been assigned to help in the camp library. An American officer had established it, filling shelves with books donated from home. English books mostly, but some German volumes too. Philosophy, literature, technical manuals. Martin, who had been so indoctrinated, so certain of Nazi ideology, found himself reading Thomas Mann, banned in Germany for years. He read in secret at first, as if someone might punish him for exposing himself to degenerate literature, but no one cared what he read. The American librarian, an older man named Frank who had been a teacher in civilian life, even recommended books. You like Mann? Frank asked, noticing Martin's choice. Try this. He handed Martin a copy of The Magic Mountain. Martin read it hungrily. Then he read Goethe, Heine, Brecht. All the German authors the Nazis had burned or banned. His education had been carefully curated propaganda. Now he was discovering his own culture's richness, accessed through the generosity of the enemy. One day, Frank sat down across from Martin in the library. May I ask you something? Frank said in careful German. Martin nodded warily. Did you know? About the camps, the extermination? Martin's stomach turned cold. What camps? Frank pulled out a folder. Photographs, documents, evidence of the Holocaust. He set them in front of Martin gently but firmly. This is what your government did. What some of your countrymen participated in. I show you this not to condemn you personally, but because I believe you deserve to know the truth. Martin looked at the photographs. His hands trembled. His vision blurred. No, he whispered. This is Allied propaganda. This cannot be real. I wish it were propaganda, Frank said sadly. But it is real. We have liberated some of these camps, seen the survivors, documented the evidence. Your nation committed genocide, systematic, industrialized murder. Martin ran from the library, vomited behind the barracks, collapsed in the mud, sobbing. Wilhelm found him there hours later, sat down beside him without speaking. Did you know? Martin finally asked. About the camps? Wilhelm was quiet for a long time. I heard rumors. I chose not to believe them. I told myself they could not be true, that our nation would not do such things. But they were true. Yes. What does that make us? Wilhelm had no answer. He put his arm around the boy's shoulders. They sat in the mud as the sun set, two Germans confronting the reality of what had been done in their name. That night, in the barracks, Carl gathered them together. Several other prisoners joined them, men who had begun to question, to doubt, to see past the propaganda. We have a choice now, Carl said quietly. We can deny what we are learning, retreat into comfortable lies, blame others, or we can face the truth, however painful, and decide what kind of men we want to be moving forward. I did not know, Dieter said, the young corporal who had once refused to wear the American coat. I swear I did not know about the camps. If I had known, would you have done anything? Carl challenged. Would any of us? We were so certain of our righteousness, so convinced we were the superior people. Would we have risked our lives to save those we had been taught to hate? Silence answered him. I don't know, Wilhelm finally said. I don't know if I would have been brave enough, but I know that I should have been, that we all should have been. And our failure, our collective failure of courage and conscience, that is something we must carry forever. How do we live with it? Martin asked. By being better, Carl answered. By learning from the Americans who gave us coats when they had every reason to let us freeze. by choosing mercy when we have the power to choose cruelty, by building a different Germany when we finally go home. If we go home, Wilhelm thought, but did not say. The news came on May 8th, 1945. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was over. The camp erupted in celebration. American soldiers cheered, fired shots in the air, embraced each other. Music played from radios. Someone produced whiskey. The victors celebrated victory. In the barracks, the German prisoners sat in silence. Wilhelm felt nothing. Not relief, not grief, just a vast emptiness. "It's over," Martin said, his voice hollow. "Yes," Karl agreed. "What happens to us now?" No one answered. They did not know. Their nation had ceased to exist in any meaningful form. The government they had served had collapsed. The ideology they had been taught to worship had led to complete destruction. They were prisoners of a war that was now over. But what did that make them? An American officer appeared that evening, Captain Morrison, looking tired but satisfied. "I'm sure you've heard the news," he said to the assembled prisoners. "Germany has surrendered. The fighting is finished. You are still prisoners of war, still subject to the Geneva Convention. But the context has changed." He paused, letting them absorb his words. "Many of you have expressed fears about what will happen next, whether we will now seek revenge, whether treatment will change." Morrison's expression grew stern. "I will tell you plainly, nothing changes. You will continue to be treated according to international law. You will continue to work, to be fed, to be cared for. Eventually, you will be repatriated to Germany. The timeline for that is uncertain, but it will happen." A prisoner raised his hand. "What if there is no Germany to return to?" Morrison's expression softened. "Then we will rebuild one, not the Germany you left. That Germany is gone. And good riddance. But a new Germany, one that remembers its culture, its achievements, its humanity. We are not fighting German people. We fought a regime. That regime is dead. The people remain." Wilhelm felt tears on his face. He wiped them away quickly, but others saw. The weeks following the surrender were strange. The urgency that had driven everything fell away. Guards became more relaxed. Rules loosened slightly. Some prisoners were even allowed supervised visits to nearby towns to work on reconstruction projects. Wilhelm joined a crew repairing a church damaged by artillery. He worked alongside American soldiers and German civilians, mixing mortar, laying bricks, restoring what war had destroyed. An old German woman brought them lunch one day, sandwiches and coffee. She looked at Wilhelm in his American overcoat, at the German uniform pants beneath it, and understood what he was. "You were Wehrmacht," she said. A statement, not a question. "Yes, grandmother. My son was too. He died in Russia." Wilhelm set down his tools. "I am sorry. Are you?" She studied his face. "Or do you just say that?" "I am sorry," Wilhelm repeated. "I am sorry for your son, for my comrades, for all the sons who died for nothing, for the mothers left behind. I am deeply, profoundly sorry." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. Someone should be." She handed him a sandwich, touched his cheek briefly. Then she left. Wilhelm ate the sandwich slowly, tasting ashes. By June, the camp population had swelled with prisoners transferred from other locations. Some had been POWs for years, captured in North Africa or Sicily. They shared stories of different camps, different guards, different experiences, but the consistent theme: American treatment had been fair. Not perfect, not without cruelty from individual guards, but structurally committed to basic human dignity. Wilhelm listened to these stories, thought about the alternative, thought about what might have happened if they had been captured by the Soviets, or if the Americans had chosen revenge over justice. One evening, Thomas Brennan sought Wilhelm out, the young guard who had shared so many silent moments. "I'm rotating home next week," Thomas said through an interpreter. "Back to Boston." "I wanted to say goodbye." Wilhelm shook his hand. "Thank you. For the coat, for everything. Thomas looked uncomfortable. I didn't do anything special. You treated me like a human being. That was more than I deserved. Everyone deserves that, Thomas said firmly. That's the point. That's what we fought for. They stood awkwardly for a moment. Then Thomas pulled something from his pocket, a small wooden cross, hand-carved. My mother sent me this. For protection. I don't need it anymore, I thought. He held it out to Wilhelm. I thought maybe you could use it. For the journey home. Wilhelm took the cross with trembling hands. I cannot accept this. Sure you can. Just a piece of wood. But my mom put a lot of love into carving it. Seems like that love could use a new person to protect. Wilhelm clutched the cross. I will keep it safe. I know you will. Thomas smiled. Be well, Wilhelm. Build a good life. Make it mean something. You too, Thomas. They shook hands again. Then Thomas walked away, heading home to Boston, to his mother, to a life beyond the war. Wilhelm never saw him again. Frankfurt, 1972. Wilhelm sat in a small apartment filled with woodworking tools and half-finished furniture. At 50, he had rebuilt his life, found his sister in the chaos of post-war Germany, started a carpentry business, married, had children, became, in most ways, an ordinary man. But the war never really left. An American historian had contacted him. She was writing a book about POW experiences and wanted to interview German prisoners who had been held in American camps. Wilhelm agreed reluctantly. Her name was Margaret Chen, second-generation Chinese-American, she explained, studying European history with fresh eyes unclouded by old hatreds. She set up a tape recorder. Tell me about your capture, she said. Take your time, Wilhelm told her. Told her about the cold, about expecting death, about the coat. The coat changed everything, he said. Not immediately, not dramatically, but it planted a seed of doubt. If Americans were the monsters we had been told about, why did they care if I froze? Why give me their own coat? And that mattered? Margaret asked. It was the first crack in the wall of lies. Everything else followed from that crack. Wilhelm showed her the wooden cross, still on a shelf above his workbench after all these years. An American soldier gave me this. His name was Thomas Brennan, from Boston. His brother died fighting us at Normandy. He had every reason to hate me, but instead, he gave me his mother's cross. I think about that often. Have you tried to contact him? No. What would I say? Thank you for not letting me die? That seems insufficient. Margaret made notes. Other prisoners I've interviewed have expressed similar sentiments. The disconnect between propaganda and reality. The confusion when mercy appeared where cruelty was expected. Wilhelm nodded. We had been taught that strength meant domination, that power meant crushing the weak. The Americans showed us a different kind of strength, the strength to be merciful even to those who do not deserve it. Do you think you didn't deserve mercy? I was complicit in terrible things. Even if I did not pull triggers in the camps, I enabled them through my silence. I was part of the machine. And the Americans? They chose to see the man, not just the uniform. They punished the regime while preserving the people. That distinction saved Germany. Saved me. Margaret switched off the recorder for a moment. Off the record. Herr Hartmann, do you think America made the right choice, being merciful to former enemies? Wilhelm considered. I think they made the only choice that led to peace. They could have destroyed us completely, starved us, brutalized us, created a generation of Germans who would seek revenge. Instead, they gave us coats, fed us, showed us what democracy looks like. And slowly, painfully, Germany learned. He gestured around his workshop. I am alive to have this conversation because Americans chose mercy. My children exist because of that choice. My grandchildren, whatever good I have done in the world since 1945, exists only because Thomas Brennan handed me a coat in the snow. Margaret turned the recorder back on. One last question. What do you want people to remember about your experience? Wilhelm was quiet for a long time. I want them to remember that hatred is easy, that revenge feels righteous, that crushing your enemy satisfies something primitive in the human soul. But mercy? Mercy is hard. Mercy requires strength that most people never find. The Americans found it, and in finding it, they won not just the war, but the peace that followed. He picked up the wooden cross. This small thing, carved by a mother's hands, given by a son who had lost his brother, accepted by an enemy who expected death. This is what defeated fascism, not just bombs and bullets. But this, the stubborn insistence on seeing humanity, even in those who had forgotten their own. The photographs are in black and white, but Wilhelm remembers the colors. The gray wool of the coat, darker than Wehrmacht gray, heavier. The pale winter sun that barely warmed the frozen earth. The red on his hands from frostbite, before the American medic treated it. In the photograph he keeps on his desk, you can see prisoners lined up outside the barracks. Every one of them wears an American coat. The photographer was documenting the camp for official records. He could not have known he was documenting a revolution in mercy. Wilhelm is there, third from the left in the back row. You cannot see his face clearly, but he knows it's him by the way he stands, shoulders curved forward, still defensive, still uncertain. This was early. Before he understood, before the propaganda fully cracked. He looks at this photograph every day, a reminder of the moment his life split into before and after. Before, Wilhelm the soldier, the believer, the young man certain of his nation's righteousness. After, Wilhelm the questioning, the rebuilding, the survivor trying to construct meaning from the ruins. The coat was the pivot point between these two men. Margaret's book came out in 1974. It was successful, translated into multiple languages. Wilhelm received a copy, inscribed, "For Wilhelm, who taught me that humanity persists even in the darkest times." With gratitude, Margaret. He read other prisoners' stories. Carl's story was there, the baker who learned to make pizza from an Italian-American cook. Martin's story, the young believer whose faith shattered when confronted with truth. Dozens of others, each unique, each following the same arc. Expectation of cruelty, receipt of mercy, slow reorientation of worldview. The book included a section on American guards. Thomas Brennan had been interviewed. He talked about his brother Danny, about his mother's letters, about trying to maintain his humanity. "I gave away my mother's cross," Thomas said in the interview. "She carved it for me, prayed over it, sent it to keep me safe. I gave it to a German prisoner because he looked like he needed it more than I did. My mother would have approved. She always said that protecting one person's humanity protects everyone's." Wilhelm wrote a letter to Thomas through the publisher. It took 6 months to reach him. "Dear Thomas," Wilhelm wrote, "I still have the cross. It sits above my workbench, watching over my work. I think of your mother often, carving it with love, hoping to protect her son. I think of you, giving it to an enemy, choosing mercy over hate. I hope Boston has been kind to you. I hope you found peace. Your friend, Wilhelm." Thomas wrote back. They corresponded irregularly for years, never met again, but maintained a connection forged in that strange winter of 1944–45. In one letter, Thomas wrote, "I think about the war sometimes. Mostly I try not to, but when I do, I remember the guys we lost. Danny at Normandy, Mike at the Bulge, all the boys who never came home. And I think about how they died fighting for something, not just to defeat Germany, but to defend the idea that people deserve dignity, that nations have obligations to be decent, that might doesn't make right. When I gave you that coat, I was honoring them, making their deaths mean something." Wilhelm kept every letter. He traveled to America once, in 1985. His daughter had married an American serviceman stationed in Germany. They moved to Philadelphia. Wilhelm visited. He stood in the arrivals terminal at Philadelphia International Airport. An old man now, white-haired and bent. An old man in an American airport, walking freely, welcomed by his daughter's new family. The American flag hung from the ceiling. Once, He would have seen it as the enemy's banner. Now he saw it as the symbol of a nation that had chosen mercy when vengeance would have been easier. His grandson, 8 years old, half German and half American, ran to greet him. "Opa, Opa." Wilhelm picked him up, held him close. This child, this impossible blend of former enemies, this proof that hatred does not have to perpetuate itself. "Tell me about the war, Opa," the boy asked later, with the casual curiosity of children who know war only from movies. "Not today," Wilhelm said gently. "Today we are here together. That is the only story that matters." But that night, alone in his daughter's guest room, Wilhelm pulled out the wooden cross, held it in his aged hands, remembered being 22 and certain he would die in the snow. Remembered Thomas Brennan, young and earnest, pressing this cross into his hands. Remembered the weight of the American coat, heavier than any garment he had ever worn. Remembered learning that the enemy could be more human than the comrades who had taught him hate. Remembered the long journey from that moment to this one grandfather to an American child, visitor to the nation he once fought, survivor of a war that tried to destroy his humanity but failed. The coat had been the beginning. Just a simple act, just a practical solution to a practical problem. Men were cold. Coats would warm them. But in that simplicity lived a revolution. In that practicality breathed a different way of being human. In that ordinary mercy existed the seed of extraordinary peace. Wilhelm fell asleep holding the cross, an old man dreaming of winter, of snow, of a young American soldier who had saved him not from death, but from something worse, from becoming the monster the propaganda insisted he should be. In the morning, his grandson found him at breakfast. "Opa, can we go see the Liberty Bell today?" "Yes," Wilhelm said, smiling. "Yes, I would like that very much." They went. Wilhelm stood before the bell, reading the inscription about liberty and freedom, and thought about the beautiful irony of a former German soldier standing here, free, welcomed, while the nation he had fought for had ceased to exist. The Americans had not just defeated Germany. They had transformed it. Not through continued oppression, but through the radical act of imagining a future where enemies could become friends. It started with a coat, just a coat, given in winter, when mercy seemed impossible and hatred would have been justified. Just a coat that said, "You are cold, and that matters more than who you were yesterday." Just a coat that carried the weight of a different future. Wilhelm touched the Liberty Bell, felt the metal cold under his palm, and whispered a prayer of gratitude for all the Thomas Brennans of the world, the quiet, decent people who choose mercy when the easier path would be revenge, who give away coats in winter, who insist on seeing humans even in enemies, who save not just lives, but the possibility of peace. The bell was silent, cracked, unable to ring, but Wilhelm heard music anyway, the silent song of the chance he had been given, the life he had rebuilt, the grandson who represented a world where German and American could blend without contradiction. They came as enemies. They left knowing what freedom really looked like. And sometimes, late at night, old men dream of winter coats and remember the Americans who gave them, and wake with tears on their faces, grateful beyond words for mercy they never expected and did not deserve, but which transformed everything. The coat hangs in Wilhelm's closet in Frankfurt now, worn but carefully preserved. Too small for him these days, but he cannot bring himself to discard it. His children do not understand his attachment to this old military coat. One day they will. One day he will be gone, and they will find his letters, read Margaret's book, hold the wooden cross, and finally understand. The coat was never just a coat. It was a choice, a statement, a radical act of imagining that the man inside the enemy uniform was still a man worth saving. And Wilhelm lived his whole life after trying to be worthy of that imagination, that mercy, that stubborn American insistence that humanity mattered more than hatred. Outside, snow begins to fall on Frankfurt. Another winter. Wilhelm is 92 now. He may not see many more winters, but he remembers the winter that mattered. The winter when the world changed. The winter when enemies gave coats to enemies and called it duty, not charity. The winter mercy changed everything. He pulls the American overcoat from his closet, drapes it over his shoulders one more time, feels its familiar weight. And he whispers what he has whispered every winter since 1944. Thank you. Just that. Just thank you. For the coat. For the mercy. For the chance to become something better than the soldier he had been. For choosing to see the human, even in the darkest winter, even in the face of every reason not to. Thank you.